I was reading on the internet, 1 in 1,000 makes a million a year. 1 in 11,000 makes 10 million a year. Then it jumps to 1 in 32,000 that makes 20 million a year. What's insane is that 1 in every 120 makes 100,000 a year. But women say crazy stuff, like they all want a guy who makes at least 200,000 a year. But almost none of them are in the 1 in 500 that can get it. It's insane, right? I'm still reading and listening, but it seems that Western women are polygamous. Oh, yes, they are polygamous. They are looking for the 666 guy, the guy who has a six-figure salary, six-pack, and 6 feet. Is it feet or foot? 6 foot, 6 feet, foot. I'm not sure. The metrics, obsession over feet, I suppose. Yeah. Foot obsession. Was it called foot fetish? It's a joke. I heard it somewhere. So anyway, it amazes me. Yeah, I was listening to this podcast. It was this professional coach, almost like a therapist coach, and he would match people, and people would come to him for advice and guidance, whatever. And I was listening to one of his YouTubes, and this woman said, I'm with a guy, and he is a six-figure guy, And she said, but I'm not the only one. There's other girls, she said, but it's okay with me as long as he pays for everything. So she had a car, a house, and everything, and she would see him whenever he wanted, and in exchange, he paid for everything. And she didn't mind sharing, pretty much admitting to polygamy. And I was amazed, what's going on here? I always thought the Western civilization was monogamous, but I'm starting to think it's not. It's not monogamous at all. There was a time, legally, monogamy was enforced over the population, and there's a good reason for it, and I'm going to try to explain why. But now the cat is out of the bag, and monogamy is history. So in the past, they had rules in these traditional, so-called traditional societies. They had rules in which adultery was a crime, and women ought to get married as fast as possible, and virgins. That was the requirement. They could cancel everything if she wasn't, because it was, almost like culturally and legally, it was the best thing to do, to be married young and virgin, and adultery was a crime. Why did they do that? In polygamous societies, 20% of men are going to have all the women, either because they are rich, better looking, or they have status, they are from good families, they have possessions. I wouldn't put my bets on looks. I don't think they could care less about looks. They cared about more power and status, you know. So in those societies, around 20% of men had all the power and status, and 80% of women was theirs. Pretty much the majority of women was theirs. So what happens to 80% of men who didn't get anything? Well, they started wars, of course, conflict, until they come up with a religion, a very severe religion that suppresses, you know, and puts men in this psychosis. Literally, it's a psychosis. It's a very strict religion, and if you do something, you know, against it's a crime, punishable, you know, even by unaliving. It's very common for them to unalive, you know, anyone who goes against the law. It's crazy. And still, even with the religion, with those many restrictions, it was inevitable that groups of men, you know, would join and create chaos, problems. This is simply because they were frustrated. They had no access to females. Other cultures, they figured, okay, let's go with religion and with, you know, law that actually has everybody get a partner. Let's try to disable this female tendency for what's it called? Hypergamy. Yeah, hypergamy, because the women are hypergamous and they don't mind sharing the same guy. So let's disable, yeah, let's use religion and law to try to, you know, capture inside a cage this nature, this female nature of hypergamy, and make them get married as early as possible, because you know, if you get married early, there's more chances of pair bonding, and make adultery illegal. If you commit adultery, it's punishable by unaliving you, you know. So in the past, it was very common, you know, to see women stoned to until they were unalived because they, you know, commit adultery or something. It wasn't about protecting genetics. Sometimes I thought to myself, maybe it's about men having this need to protect their genealogical tree. No, it's not. Because in the past, I mean, they tried it with religion. There wasn't, you know, entertainment as we have nowadays. Yeah, you have, you know, the internet, you have video games, you have corn, you have all types of ways, you know, to get off, to release the pressure, so to speak. Yeah, but back in those days, there was nothing like that. Back in those days, when man was frustrated, they would gather and they would start problems like war, you know. They would gather and start problems and war, you know, to avoid war and conflict. You know, when you have an invading army, goes from border to border, it's mainly men, frustrated men, looking for what? Some action. They would pillage and rape, because they probably come from a polygamous society, you know. So to stop this continuous warfare, they came up with a system, the monogamous system, to stop frustrated men from starting conflicts. That's what I think. Yeah. So polygamous societies, in my opinion, bred conflict, and monogamous society bred peace. Nowadays, things are a bit different, like I said, with technology and everything. People can get off very easily. And what are the measures they are trying to pass nowadays? You see, the West kind of blew it because they thought they were from a monogamous situation. They thought, you know, if we don't get married and have plenty of sex, we are not, you know, breaking the law. So better not have sex. Then better not to get married. Therefore, you're not going to be charged with adultery. That's why people started having sex before marriage. And that's why the whole system collapsed eventually with the introduction of, easy control of the population. Was it called easy contraception? Um, they couldn't go against the law, so they had to marry virgin and not commit adultery. But times started changing, and let's stay single and have sex before marriage, and therefore we're not breaking the law. But that was a slippery slope. It starts little by little, and then we arrive at the sexual revolution that everybody has sex and promiscuous sex. And by the way, people who end up mutilating their bodies with piercings and tattoos, they probably have trauma, and they have this stare in their faces. I was just listening to this doctor, works in these clinics and stuff, and he was saying that 100% of women that come here to test if they have a sexually transmitted disease, they're all pierced and tattooed. So there's a link between that, body mutilation and promiscuity. Anyway, nowadays they are coming up with a different. That everybody talks about war nowadays, all over the place, because there's lots of what? Incels. And they are afraid that they might start some shit. That's why politicians are talking constantly about it, in my opinion. Anyway, the tendency towards, polygamy will continue. There's going to be a handful of people that's going to have access, and it seems that's going to be the tendency because they are importing, people from polygamous nations, and it's all men. Of course, it's all men. It's the rejects. They have no families. So they are hoping to come in this sort of colonization style, like in the past when you had all these invading armies of just men. They're hoping to find, some action, I would say. And sometimes they do, but through crime. There's lots of, sex crimes happening all over, cities in Europe. What they might be thinking of, for instance, is, sex robots. They are thinking about social minimum, salary income, so that men are, in their cave and they don't have to worry about money. They will have a minimum salary income. Everything will be digital. So if you behave, you will have access to the money, you'll have access to video games, and that's how they've probably planned the future. For the 80% of men that are not going to have, a wife, and this polygamy society, pretty much there's going to be 20% that are going to, get everybody else pregnant. And I suppose that's how things are going to be from now on. Now, is it going to work? No, because even in a polygamous state, women are not getting pregnant. They don't want to be mothers. So unless they come up with something that will change their minds, it doesn't matter what religion, it doesn't matter what system they might implement. The birth rate is going to keep going down because, honestly, I don't think, with all of these options that we have now, there's only a handful that actually want to be parents. And so it's almost like Pandora's box was opened, with, in my opinion, with the contraception, the pill, it is a Pandora box moment. And now it's impossible to put it back in. If you try to make it illegal, a black market will grow even bigger, demand for it will grow even bigger. So I think it's going to be extinct extinct event that will be facing. But of course, there will always be survivors. There's always decent people out there who don't have their consciousness damaged. I look at this and I'm not entirely anti-technology, but in a sense I am anti-technology because it is technology that is destroying humanity. Humanity is actually giving more importance to technology than to themselves and their families. And they think just because it's handy, just because it's convenient, they will sacrifice everything, even their selves and their families, just because of technology. And that I just don't agree. People have become slaves of technology, slaves of electricity, and it's not. I don't see this getting any better. So their consciousness, their body, their mind is polluted with technology, with chemicals, with from pharmaceuticals, from agriculture, from the frequencies that are from all these digital devices that we have. Everybody is sick, yeah, and there's a few that are still thinking straight, and they still have healthy relations and healthy families. But most people, concentrated around cities where technology is more, focused. I think it's going towards a great extinction event. You know, not to sound doom and gloom. You know. Anyway,